Welcome to another episode of the Community Broadband Bits podcast. I'm Christopher Mitchell at the Institute for Local Self-Reliance in St. Paul, Minnesota. It is the middle of September, and I'm excited to be joined by Karl Bode, who is the freelance reporter hero of the Smart Mouth Tech Folk. Welcome.
Well, thank you so much. That's a glorious introduction. I appreciate it.
Karl, you've been working on this stuff for, 130 years, I think?
175 years I've been writing about technology on the internet, and I feel every single year in my bones.
I believe that. We've also got Jordan Pittman. Jordan's usually hiding in the back. He's the editor of the show. In fact, the editor of a lot of our video work now. And our digital opportunity lead is his proper title. Welcome, Jordan.
Thanks, Chris. And I was just joking with you earlier. I think this is the first time I'm on the podcast outside of like a prediction show. So happy to be on.
So we're going to do a little grab bag of topics. The first one is going to be about, these are all going to be about the internet. Not so much internet access, but more the internet, which is something that I spent the weekend a little bit concerned about the future of. And we're going to talk a little bit about Section 230 and freedom of speech on the internet. That's going to lead into hopefully a big show following this one, an interview that is going to really dig into that with someone who really knows what's going on there. We're going to talk a little bit about the state of the media and AI slop and the threat that poses to the internet. So today's going to be a fun show. We're trying to keep it a little bit short, not go too deep on it. But I will say that the three of us, and also often joined by Sean from our team as well, are been on TikTok and other social medias. I'd encourage you to find us on like YouTube Shorts or on the Gram because I sort of prefer those. But I understand most people are on TikTok, so you're probably going to find us there. So with that said, I want to lead into this, and I'm going to prep Karl first on this. When Jimmy Kimmel was put on suspension, one of the things I saw from people was that it wasn't that big of a deal. He'll probably come back. He'll go from a big staff and $30 million budget a year or something like that to a small staff and a $2 million budget a year on podcasts, and he'll be able to say what he wants, and there won't be any issues anywhere. And one of my first thoughts was, I don't think this administration is content just to throw its weight around to try to intimidate the broadcasters. I feel like this administration is concerned about anyone that is speaking out against it. And so I was thinking about the threat to the internet of government, particularly under Donald Trump, but under any United States government that's going to start trying to figure out how to put its thumb on the scale and manipulate speech. So, Karl, let's just start there, and then we'll wander our way back over to Section 230. But how do you react to that?
So these are authoritarians. It's clear. These are authoritarians. They will keep pushing and pushing and pushing until they run into something other than pudding.
Okay, so let me stop you there to just ask you to back it up, because you're saying that some people who are listening might be thinking, yeah, you guys just don't like Trump, as opposed to thinking whether or not this is actually a regime that has multiple people in it who have an authoritarian mindset. Can you just give me one example of in which way? And this is not a political show, but to talk about the threat to the internet, we kind of have to get at some of the people that are involved here. So, Karl, back it up for a second. I don't mean go backwards. I mean, like, give us the evidence, give us some receipts.
So look, if you look at Trump FCC boss Brendan Carr, the second he got appointed, he started leveraging all the levers of power to threaten companies into doing things that Trump wanted done. He violated the law. He ignored precedent. He ignored consumer impact. Whether you're a Republican or a Democrat, and there's plenty of both who oppose Carr at this moment, it's obvious that he does not respect the rule of law. He's launched multiple fake investigations into companies for having DEI references on their website, which is, as we know, efforts to at least address racism and sexism in the workplace. He's leveraged fake investigations to threaten journalists and threaten major media companies like Comcast if they tried to do basic reporting of factual reality. So this is all behavior of authoritarianism. And no, even if he's not going to stop at just trying to threaten the online cable TV late-night talk show hosts, he's going to continue. He's going to threaten the internet. He's going to do everything he can to eliminate journalism, combat education. These are all hallmark, trademark behaviors of authoritarian.
We got the receipts, and I'll just throw in there as backup once again, because I'm going to try and bend over backwards to try to keep this, whether regardless of my own opinions, I want to try and keep it to what I think are relevant facts. And like, I'll just throw out in support of you also, both Rand Paul and Ted Cruz have said, we hate Jimmy Kimmel, but we don't think it's appropriate for the Federal Communications Commission to threaten companies to try to like change who they put on the air. So
Tucker Carlson this week was a third. There
Yeah.
were several. They recognize that this can be flipped on its head, and the government, if you give it too much power over speech, it can be flipped on its head when their enemies are in power, and they can be on the receiving end, and they're not going to like that. So there's bipartisan opposition to that. You can see there's been numerous statements from, several previous FCC commissioners from both parties saying this is a dangerous path. You don't want Brendan Carr having this kind of power. The irony to me is that with one hand, Carr is destroying all the levers within the FCC that can do anything about consumer protection and protect people from consumer issues and big broadband monopolies. And with his other hand, he's claiming he has all the power in the world to do all this stuff to bully companies. One of those sides has to win. I suspect it's the one where he has less power than he actually thinks. But it's still dangerous.
One of the things that's driving me crazy is the prison phone justice situation, which is a title that gets to the fact that basically there's a few people that are getting rich. I mean, like obscenely wealthy off of charging really high costs to people who are incarcerated for them to make phone calls, video phone calls, communicate with their loved ones. And this is an issue beyond just sort of like do-gooderism, because the more you restrict communication with people who are in prison, the more likely they are to come out and commit more crimes and go back in. And that's bad for all of us. The FCC was going to crack down on this and crack down and make sure that we were going to have reasonable rates for phone calls and things like that. And that's been reversed. Or, and when you hear them talk, it's like you said, Karl, is this question about, we have to make sure we have the right authority. And it's amazing how in some cases, supposedly they're limited by law. In other cases, they're not.
It took decades. It took decades to get a lot of those prison telecom reforms in places, and that's a very seedy industry where the telecom monopolies get kickbacks and all sorts of dodgy behaviors to ensure that they have a monopoly over phone and video conferencing in these prisons. And it took decades of activism to get anywhere close to price caps to make sure it was affordable. And Brendan Carr just threw it all in the trash to please the people at these companies.
I'm going to ignore Jordan for one more second because I'm going to hit you with this because I think you're more prepared for it. But so when I saw all this going on, and then when Jimmy Kimmel gets suspended, a number of people were like, he's going to have a podcast, he'll be fine. To which I was just like, why would we think that the Trump administration would go to the effort of bringing the big media broadcasters to heel and then say, but we hands off the internet, can't do anything there. And I was literally driving the car. I remember where I was right now. It's like one of those memories that'll just stick with me. And I was like, we're going back to Section 230. And I was just thinking about the Section 230 discussions we've had, which is Section 230 in the Telecommunications Act of 96, right? That's where we are. I always get confused when I use something too long without context. It basically says that, like, if you're running a website, like you are, whether you're Facebook or whether you are communitynetworks.org, if someone posts a comment there that violates the law, you are not held responsible. And as the person that owns the website, it's someone else's speech. And there's been a discussion left and right all over the place about whether or not that's appropriate, because there are some problems that result from that. I'm not someone who's going to defend Facebook all day, but give us a sense of how Section 230 is related to this.
Well, basically, this isn't my expert area of expertise, but I'll give you a pretty broad, Section 230 basically says that Google is not responsible for somebody going to their forums and posting a bunch of racist screeds or other behaviors. The goal here for a lot of people on the right and left is to get rid of Section 230 under the pretense that this would somehow create a new glorious age of speech and hold big tech companies accountable. In reality, it's going to be likely abused to make sure that Google has to go into their forums and crack down on anything that the government doesn't like. That won't just be illegal stuff. That could be, people supporting LGBTQ rights. It could be, people trying to do racial activism or community activism. If you allow the government to come in and start bullying these companies into what's on their platforms in this fashion, you're going to have a much, much worse free speech situation and all kinds of tendril problems that are raised. And the most annoying thing is a lot of these attacks are being dressed up as a concern for free speech when it's the exact opposite.
Or I think in the left, I think it's often a concern that the 230 allows Google and Facebook to traffic in conspiracy theories and other things without any sort of sanction. And that's what some people on the left are concerned about. And there's a variety of people on the right and the left who have different concerns than we might have surfaced. But those are the ones I think we hear about. Jordan, I want to know before we move on, because Section 230 is something I think we're going to spend a lot of time on in the next show. But do you have any questions or any thoughts as we sort of talk about this? Because I do feel like the freedom to communicate widely and openly on the internet, it might be about to see some real pressure unlike anything we've seen before.
Yeah, I mean, it's really, I think this kind of goes into, when it came to Tucker Carlson. Oh, he talked about it briefly, but I think the last couple of weeks, there's just been so much that's going on. I think there's been this conversation about hate speech, right? Like, I think Pam Bondi was like, oh, like, the stuff that happened to Charlie Kirk and, like, the shooter, this is all hate speech, and we're coming after this. And I just find this really interesting because, again, this is the same right that believes in free speech and believes that all speech is free speech. There's no such thing as hate speech. So, like, now we're in this weird situation that because of free speech, we're going to take this hate speech and use it as a way to get rid of your free speech in the name of free speech. That's what it's like sounding like to me. And it's really confusing me because this gets to the bigger crux, which I think we could talk about if we want to, but it's just like, it feels as if the moves that the Trump administration is doing currently when it comes to the FCC and everything else, when it's cracking down on this, the repercussions of this is going to be far beyond this administration. Like, these are some of the things that we've been talking about, anything they've been done, but specifically about this. Once they do this, like, Pandora's box is open. Like, once you get to that point, like, there's not like a moment where you can just be like, okay, we're going to get back to how we were originally with this idea of like the internet's just this free speech location. And that's what the beauty of it was, right? Like, just being able to just to hop online. We're able to hop online, right? Give our takes on these things. We're not super experts, but we have enough expertise to feel like, okay, this is what our opinion is. We have the platform where there's not like a particular gatekeeper that can stop us from this. It's just like, hey, here you go. But that can change, and that's going to almost create this sort of police state where people feel like, well, I have this thought on this thing, but if the Trump administration deems it as something that's not worthy to talk about, then I'm not going to speak up. And like, that's where, democracy, quote unquote, dies in darkness, in my opinion, when people just don't feel emboldened and empowered to speak their mind. And this is what makes this country so great. This is what we actually believe in. So if we're not doing that, it doesn't matter how you frame it or how the Trump administration frame it as protecting. The reality is quite opposite of that. So it's concerning for me.
I mean, you're saying that brings up two things for me. One is that I do think most people will simultaneously say people shouldn't be allowed to say that thing and we need to have free speech, right? Like, people believe all the time in contradictory things. And so, but one of the things that I am amazed at is how surprised I always am. I feel like I like having Karl on in part because I feel like I'm the sucker and Karl's like the wise guy who's like, yeah, dude, like, I can't believe you didn't see this coming. But I do feel like if you see someone like repeatedly say that they are a free speech warrior, the odds that they are a free speech warrior, like, they decline every time you hear them say it, right?
There's a whole bunch of, it's like people who love innovation or talk too much about being innovative or innovation. They're usually the least innovative people you can find, and I find the same things true.
No, it's true. And I one of the things that about the Institute for Local Self-Reliance that I don't think that this is like putting our best foot forward, but like, I believe local governments should be able to make mistakes. I think communities should be able to choose to live in ways that I don't approve of, as long as they are respecting the rights of other human beings, right? And similarly, I don't like having freaking Russian misinformation spread all across Facebook. And that's not the only thing that's there, but is there. But like, it is something that I'm concerned about some ways in which it could be cracked down upon. Like, there is like, misinformation is freedom of speech. And like, at a certain point, we got to figure out how to deal with that without using the federal government's powers. Go ahead.
Yeah, I'm fascinated with propaganda, and it's probably something, if I went back to school, I would have studied it because it's always fascinated me. But yeah, there are ways to do that without exploiting government power. You could do what Finland does to tackle propaganda. They teach kindergarten kids media literacy skills to recognize bullshit on the internet. They teach them from a foundational age. You could impose media consolidation limits so you don't let media fall into the hands of like 4 billionaires who all have the same right-wing tendencies. There's all the stuff you could do. You could create more potent social online platforms that are more distributed so they're not so easy to get purchased and destroyed by billionaires. There's a whole bunch of stuff we can and should be doing. Creatively funding journalism, finding a way to crowdfund, new media instead of letting all the medias get consolidated under corporate power. There's a whole bunch of stuff we could do for propaganda, and we are doing none of it. So instead we have this stuff, which proposes to be a solution to that is actually a bad faith, bad intention solution that's going to cause all sorts of new problems.
And this actually leads right into state of the media. We're just going to talk a couple minutes on this, but the media, boy, one of the things, I come back to this frequently, and I pay so much money for media. Oh man, I subscribe to like magazines, podcasts, like radio stations, television stuff. Like it's one of the things I truly believe, and like, we have to support the media. But one of the things that I get a kick out of is the bulwark, which I've been a fan of ever since I remember before. I think they even had a name for it. I was tracking it, and they often say, like, we don't have any mergers pending anywhere, so we can be honest about what we're doing. And I think that is so important to have a media that is not cross purposes. NBC being owned by GE all those years ago. It's like, you really expecting them to do deep reporting on like nuclear weapons or nuclear facilities? No, I do not. And so when it comes to the media, I feel like we're in a real tough place. And Karl, this is something that you write about all the time, and I feel like no one else covers. In fact, I think every time you're on the show, I say, you keep saying this thing that no one else says, which is that our media is killing us.
It is, slowly, yeah. I mean, most of these major media companies are owned by people who don't want to make the government mad. They're billionaires, usually center-right billionaires who want things like tax cuts. They want mindless deregulation. They don't want the FCC telling them they can't rip off local rural farmers. They want subsidies without any strings. So they're not inclined to be the kinds of organizations that are going to do tough truth-to-power reporting in the first place. It's just biologically not going to be in their natures. Now, there's been, for years, we heard rhetoric about how, there's a big, strong firewall between ownership and the editorial newsroom. There's no way, the Wall Street Journal owned by Rupert Murdoch would never let them cross the line between management and the work. But now you see what that was worth. When authoritarians come knocking, you see exactly what all those promises were worth, and they weren't worth much. It's actually much worse than I thought it was going to be, and I had pretty low expectations for like companies like CBS and ABC, who are just throwing billions of dollars in settlements towards the Trump administration for cases that they really could have easily won. Cases that they could have just gone out and gotten lawyers to do for free for them, that wouldn't even cost them that much money.
I mean, the 60 Minutes case, in my mind, is the canonical example, and it's not even alone in terms of being so defensible. But the idea that 60 Minutes was being sued because they shot an interview and then they cut it, which is literally the premise of 60 Minutes, which is that they do interviews with people and then they pull the parts forth that they think are newsworthy and relevant. And they don't show us all the other stuff because we don't have 5 hours to sit there and watch outtakes of them like coughing in the middle of an answer or something like that. So you have these sorts of situations that come about where now we have precedents of the media basically paying on lawsuits. So just to give people a sense of what can happen now, and what we're seeing is you have the government basically saying, we want you to pay us. And now, to make it easy for you to pay us, we're going to have a lawsuit against you that is laughably bad, that no court would ever accept. And then you are going to settle it and write us a check that has like 6 or more zeros after it. And that is going to be okay because it's a legal settlement. It's not a bribe or anything. Yeah, well, it's a remarkable innovation. There's the innovation, Karl. That's innovative.
Yeah, that's the most innovative thing I've seen out of government in a while. They're using the government merger regulatory approval process to threaten these companies into doing what they want. If you don't, weaken your journalism or pay us a big settlement for no reason, then we are not going to approve your big pointless merger. And these are terrible. To be clear, these media mergers are a huge problem in the first place. They're part of the reason we're even in this spot where CBS has so much influence. I mean, they were already pretty bad at doing competent merger review where they actually look at the impact of letting one man own 50,000 ABC or CBS affiliates, which is hugely problematic. And it was already bad, and it's just gotten worse.
So how do we react, though, to the idea? I mean, Jordan, I think you're sitting here and like, Jordan, how many times in the last 5 years have you watched the evening news?
Last 5 years? I mean, I could probably count on my hands, to be quite honest with you. And it's coming
from somebody.
And it's coming from someone who loves the news. Like I have subscriptions, like you kind of mentioned. Like I do my own research to the best of my ability. But to actually just sit down and like watch a late night CNN or a late night MSNBC, I don't do that.
Or the local channels. That's what I was getting into. Like, no, 100% no, right? Because like, if you want to see some provocative footage of someone of the scene after there was a shooting, that's where you go. But it's irrelevant for our lives for the most part. Although if you're into like high school sports, kudos. Like that's where you're probably going to go.
Absolutely.
So, but this gets said just from my question is sort of like, I do feel like it is a little bit weird for this all to be about like, you're going to suspend Jimmy Kimmel because you want to get this like approval for these mergers for this like system that like is the dinosaurs are watching, right? I mean, like their audience is entirely people that are like, 70 years old. So Karl, I'm just curious, like how much should we actually be concerned with? Like how does it really impact anything?
It still matters. I hear that a lot. Traditional media is dying. It's like, who cares how much they merge and buy, and we'll just let them die off and we'll all go to TikTok. Well, TikTok was just sold to a bunch of Trump-supporting billionaires, and the quest isn't going to stop with traditional media. These companies are pushing the FCC to get rid of decades-old media consolidation limits that were built with bipartisan approval, like the one that prevents the big four networks from merging. They're going to get rid of those. Those companies are going to start merging, which is bad for everybody. And then they're going to start merging with the tech companies and the telecom companies. You're going to have Comcast, NBC, CBS, Universal, NBC. It's not going to stop. These companies are all out of original ideas. And the only thing left to goose those earnings and get some tax breaks and boost that stock a little bit is consolidation and the idea that if you merge and grow, you're being innovative. And there's going to be a whole bunch more. It's not going to just stop with the major networks. It's going to continue. And as that continues, the people at the top of the food chain are going to continue to implement their desires on what the media you consume looks like. And it's not going to be good.
I do want to say, there's a part of me that wanted to push back there specifically to say, and for people who are more supportive of Trump and his policies, imagine Soros doing this. The thing is that I can't imagine it actually happening, because if we have President Mamdani, and I'm going to do a caricature of him now. I don't know very much about his policy, frankly. I mean, I know the same that most people know, which is nothing, because he's been totally, his statements have been taken out of context, and not only that, are still evolving because he's a young man. But imagine for a second that we have President Mamdani, and he's going to try to drive these companies to have Soros buy them. They're going to push back, and they're going to push back in ways that they don't against Trump, because there's this sense, and I think it's an accurate sense, but there is this sense that Trump is going to punish them. Whereas Democrats, if a Democratic President Mamdani tried to push back and punish companies, half of the Democrats in the Senate would say this is unacceptable, and they would probably vote for impeachment. Whereas almost no Republicans are willing to turn against. We have a sense, I think, that the Democrats would turn against an authoritarian on the left. I think that's accurate, but I don't even want to know. I don't want to test the theory. Let's not do it.
These companies would oppose that because he would also be involved in doing things like having competent regulation of their interests and making them pay a decent amount of taxes. So it would be the opposition would be rolled into one ball like that. But there are a lot of Democrat rich people, and one of the reasons they don't invest in media is because they don't want a truth-telling, truth-to-power media either, questioning how they got all that wealth and why they don't pay their workers more.
Mm-hmm.
Why don't you pay your taxes? These people that own these companies are not the kind of people that want a lot of hard, truthful reporting about why rural America is being screwed over and why wages are so suppressed. So it is a bipartisan sport. I mean, there are more people, I think, on the Democratic side of the aisle that care about media consolidation and issues, but it's a bipartisan dysfunction.
No. All right, AI Slop, before we run out of time. Jordan, I'm curious if you wanted to come up with a test in the future of feeding me two different things. One would be one column would be AI Slop, and the other would be legitimate expressions of the generations that are younger than you. And we could see if I could figure out which was which.
Yeah. You know what's funny? I think that actually can be a segment on TikTok, because I think what's getting scary about the slop is that regardless if we see it as slop from our media literacy, a lot of people, even myself included at times, I kind of see some AI videos. I'm just like, that was an AI video? I wasn't too familiar about that. I think if anybody really knows, it was bunnies hopping on a trampoline. I don't know if y'all saw that one, but it was just hopping, and it looked pretty authentic to me. And then somebody in the comment was like, oh, by the way, this is something I just made up. And we're all just like, wow, okay, well, the slop is getting almost serviceable enough where if I'm getting caught by, I can't imagine your 60-year-old, 70-year-old grandma on Facebook seeing something on there too. So this slop is getting to a point where it's just everywhere.
Now, Karl, I'm curious. You've been immersing yourself in this, which is why we're talking about it. Are we concerned primarily about bunnies on trampolines, or is there something actually...
I think, that tech is cool. It creates some strange videos. I enjoy the weird, artistic, distorted videos and stuff like that. But it's also being implemented to create a bunch of propaganda. I wrote a story about a startup last week who was basically filling the internet with these AI-generated podcasts made by fake experts in subjects. And they were getting $3 or $4 a pop. So they were incentivized to throw 3,000 or 4,000 of these on the internet at a time. And my concern is that you just have this incentive to create this ad engagement circle of just automated crap where everything's low quality, but you do it at volume and you do it fast and you do it constantly. And I want to know what an internet 10 years out looks like when these are predominantly the people involved in shaping the discourse, because we're already waging war on journalism, we're already waging war on education and informed consensus. So this future trajectory, and I don't want to be old man yells at people on his lawn type of stuff, but I start to get a little worried about what happens when you have just a wall-to-wall infotainment, ad-based gibberish everywhere, and you can't really get informed information anymore.
And this is where I think, Jordan, I want to tap into you to get a sense of how you feel like, people your age are reacting to this, because I view this, I try to view this with like a longer view of technological change, right? And so like you have books that come along and it's really the Bible gets printed for 100 years, and then you have other books start to come out. And you have people's minds are blown because they have this new technology. You have the television, you have the radio, you have all this different stuff. It totally changes the way we relate to each other, the way we think about things. And one of the things I've been hoping is that like your age, Jordan, you basically like someone that whether it's you or like your peers see something online and you're like, it's probably bullshit. Like Karl said earlier about the kids in Finland who are learning it. Even if we're not teaching it to you in schools, I hope that there's a sense that like you're not watching, you don't have a lot of peers who are watching Fox News who are being like, like this is where I got to get my news is from like cable television. And like, I hope that most people are like, cable television is ridiculous. Like I'm getting my news from this other place.
Yeah, no. What's really funny about that? I think when it comes to the idea of AI, I think our generation was particularly, at least at the beginning, was excited about it because there's this prospect of, like you said, when it comes to any technological advancement, our smartphones, whatever the case may be, like at least Gen Z, like I'm an older Gen Zer, like I saw that transition from like flip phone to BlackBerry to like iPhone. So like that sort of technological advancement we were excited for. So when AI came up, it was one of those like, okay, this is another line of ways to make our work more efficient. And, there's a quote that I saw that I really like that kind of summarized, I guess, Gen Z's kind of perspective on AI. Is this idea that I envision AI to help replace hard labor so I can work on my art and music. What AI has turned into now is doing art and music so I can continue to work in hard labor. That's not what I want. So it's one of those things where now when you see AI, for the most part, Gen Z is just like AI, like don't use ChatGPT. Like I think I see videos all the time, even on TikTok, where it's just like we're losing critical thinking skills because you decide that you don't know what you want to make for your sandwich, so you're asking ChatGPT. Like that's not going to help you out long term. So I think it's when it comes to the slop and the propaganda, I think a lot of us are already understanding, like, okay, this is like slop, or this is just something that somebody's using. They're distorting voices, whatever the case may be, in the name of whatever they're trying to promote. But even beyond that, I think we're like seeing AI as a sort of like wall that's like separating Americans from thinking critically about the things around us, which, as we've been talking about throughout this whole podcast, right? There's a lot of stuff that's going on. There's a lot of stuff that's been long-standing that's being challenged for the first time in this country. And you have to start asking yourself these critical thinking questions, or at least just talk about it. And like, if you can't even think about that because you're like, wow, I don't know what to do today, I'm going to ask ChatGPT. Like, you're losing that ability to actually critically think about it. So for a lot of us, it's kind of like, it went from yay to AI to like, man, I don't want to see anything about this at all, man. Get this out of my face.
And the automation is one thing. My main concern isn't always the technology. It's the people implementing it and how,
right?
Because I've used automation already for some good stuff. I used it on the Google's chat thing to help me cancel a subscription. It worked great. It was more efficient than calling somebody on the phone. Fine. But when you start pumping the AI into these systems that just create fake news reports for clicks at a massive scale that we've never seen before, you're going to have
Absolutely. And it's like, I actually I did a presentation about this in college, and I was a huge advocate for like self-driving cars. I was just like, self-driving cars are going to be great, less traffic, less deaths. And like now I'm like, to your point, Karl, a lot of this stuff that AI is doing is good to a degree, but what is making it bad is the people that are dictating where the benefits are coming from. So like AI is supposed to supposedly, if you're using it more for labor, that's less of us having to work. That's more money for them in their pockets. But instead of giving it back to the people to give them bigger salaries or less working hours, they're still working just as much with less pay, but the money's just going into the pockets of these billionaires. And that's what's the real frustrating part about that. So it's like you add that with the propaganda that you've been alluding to earlier, like it just starts this whole like slop mess of like what AI is like currently contributing.
That's, I think, a lot about who benefits from technological change and like where do the increased productivity, who draws that benefits, are they shared? But the concern I have with what Karl's raising, I think, is whether or not we enter into a sort of like the Middle Ages, but the Dark Ages of of the time in which, like you can't figure out what's real and what isn't. Right now, I think maybe the main thing is like things like the Wayback Machine, right? And the Internet Archive, being able to like go back and find things. And now I wonder how they're able to like try to move forward. And if they're going to be wasting 90% of what they're going to be recording is going to be, crap that was just made for no reason other than sludging them up. We're out of time. So I do want to thank Jordan and Karl for coming on and jumping in for just sort of a stream of consciousness on a couple of subjects relating to the internet, how we use it, and some of our fears about where it's going. Thank you, guys.
No, thank you, Chris. Appreciate it.
We have transcripts for this and other podcasts available at communitynetworks.org/broadbandbits. Email us at podcast@communitynetworks.org with your ideas for the show. Follow Chris on Blue Sky. His handle's @SportsShotChris. Follow Community Network's stories on Blue Sky. The handle's @CommunityNet. Subscribe to this and other podcasts from ILSR, including Building Local Power, Local Energy Rules, and the Composting for Community podcast. You can access them anywhere you get your podcasts. Catch the latest important research from all of our initiatives if you subscribe to our monthly newsletter at ilsr.org. While you're there, please take a moment to donate. Your support in any amount keeps us going. Thank you to Artie Huseby for the song Warm Duck Shuffle, licensed through Creative Commons.